So in this video, we're going to determine the trig functions of real numbers, okay, real numbers for t, okay, which is a point on the unit circle, okay. So we're going to know the trig ratios for the trig functions of real numbers. There's 6 of those. We've talked about sine, cosine, and tangent before, but now we're going to talk about their reciprocals. Okay, the reciprocal of sine is what we call cosecant here. I'll spell that out in a little bit. The reciprocal of cosine is secant, and the reciprocal of tangent is cotangent, okay? So we're going to use the terminal point to determine those 6 trig functions for special values, all right, just like we did when we were filling out the unit circle, just like we did when we were using reference numbers of those special values, okay? And again, remember the main thing to pay attention to here, we're still on the unit circle, all right? And in the last bullet, we're going to know the sign value of the 6 trig functions based on the quadrant. Okay, so depending on where t is, depending on where this real number t is, if it's in quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, or quadrant 4, the sign, S-I-G-N, of the trig function could be positive or could be negative. And we'll go over how to determine those in this set of notes, okay? So the definition of these 6 trig functions, we're going to let t be any real number, and we're going to let p, with the coordinates x, comma, y, be the terminal point on the unit circle that corresponds or is determined by that real number t. If that's the case, okay, if we're on the unit circle and we've got this terminal point x, comma, y that's on the unit circle and represents t, we're going to define the 6 trig functions as follows. So the sign of that real number t is going to be the y-coordinate. Okay, so whatever the y-coordinate is, if we're on the unit circle, that's going to be the value for the sign. The cosine of that real number t is going to be the x value, the x-coordinate. All right. Tangent of t is going to be the ratio y over x. Okay. And we say here that x can't be 0. If x happens to be 0, we would just say then that the tangent is undefined at that point, okay, or for that real number. The cosecant of t is, again, the reciprocal of sine, so it's 1 divided by y. And again, y can't be 0. If it is, then the cosecant would be undefined. The secant is a reciprocal of cosine, so it would be 1 divided by x. And again, x can't be 0. If it is, the secant would be undefined at that real number t. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so notice we've just taken the reciprocal of this ratio, and cotangent would be the x-coordinate divided by the y-coordinate. So because y is in the denominator, it couldn't be 0. If it is, then cotangent would be undefined at that value for t, okay? So let's complete this table first. It's going to kind of help us out. And I've already given you the terminal point, okay? We've done this in a previous video and a previous set of notes, okay? So if t equals 0, the terminal point was at 1, comma 0, all right? So x is 1 and y is 0. So remember, the sign is the y-coordinate, so the sign of 0 is 0. And you can verify that using a calculator anytime you want to. Cosine is the x-coordinate, so 1. Tangent is the y-coordinate, 0, divided by the x-coordinate, 1. Well, 0 divided by 1 is 0. Okay. Cosecant is 1 divided by y. Well, 1 divided by 0 is undefined. Secant is 1 divided by x. So 1 divided by the x-coordinate here is going to be 1. And cotangent is x divided by y. And again, we 1 divided by 0, which is undefined, okay? So this would be the 6 trig functions for that special value t equals 0, okay? All right, the terminal point for pi over 6 is radical 3 over 2, comma 1/2, all right? So the sign of pi over 6 is going to be 1/2, which is the y-coordinate. The cosine of pi over 6 would be radical 3 over 2, or the x-coordinate, okay? The tangent is 1/2 over radical 3 over 2, okay? So you're going to have to, work that out. At this point, you should be able to do that. But when you do, you get 1/2 divided by radical 3 over 2, which simplifies to 1 over radical 3. And then we have to rationalize the denominator, which leads us to radical 3 over 3, okay? And if you have questions on that, contact me and I'll show you how to work those all those steps out. Okay. Cosecant, remember, is the reciprocal of sine. Well, the reciprocal of 1/2 is 2. Okay. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So that gives me 2 over radical 3. And then I have to rationalize the denominator, so it's going to be 2 radical 3 over 3. All right? And tangent and cotangent are reciprocals, so this should be 3 over radical 3, which is going to simplify to just radical 3. So that's the 6 trig function values for this special value, pi over 6. Okay? Pi over 4. The terminal point for pi over 4 on the unit circle is radical 2 over 2, comma, radical 2 over 2. So sine and cosine are both going to have the same value. Okay? Tangent is y divided by x. Well, when you divide a number by itself, you just get 1, so the tangent's going to be 1. Okay? Cosecant, we're going to flip this and rationalize and simplify. We just get radical 2. Okay? Same thing's going to happen for secant. We get radical 2. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent, so that's just going to be positive 1. You could also work it as x divided by y, so we get 1. Okay? Pi over 3, terminal point is 1/2 for x, radical 3 over 2 for y. Okay, notice we're going to have these same values that we had for pi over 6. They're just going to be in a different order, okay? So the y value here for sine is going to be radical 3 over 2. The x value here for cosine is going to be 1 over x. Okay? Tangent's going to be y divided by x. And when you simplify that, you're just going to get radical 3. Okay? Cosecant is going to be 2 radical 3 over 3. Make sure you work that out. You're going to do the reciprocal of radical 3 over 2. You're going to rationalize and then simplify if you can. Okay? Secant is going to be the reciprocal of 1/2, which is just 2. And tangent and cotangent are reciprocals, so this would be 1 divided by radical 3 or radical 3 over 3. Okay? And finally, at pi over 2, the sine is going to be 1. The y-coordinate's 1. Cosine is going to be 0. Tangent is going to be 1 divided by 0, which is undefined. Okay. Cosecant is going to be the reciprocal of sine, or 1, so that's going to be 1. Secant is 1 divided by x. Well, 1 divided by 0 is undefined. And cotangent is going to be x, 0 divided by y, 1, which gives me 0. Okay? So that's the 6 trig functions for all the special values that we use in our unit circle.